What if Luffy was taken in by Kaido and raised by the beast pirates from a young age, surrounded by monsters and molded by brute strength? How would that shape his powers, personality, and the future of One Piece? Dawn Island was quiet that morning, with the sea all calm and a clear sky. Children were running around. One of those children was a boy named Monkey D. Luffy. His grandpa Garp had recently brought him to the island, and he was going about the day by grabbing fruit from the trees in the forest. He wiped his nose with his arm and shouted into the trees, trying to scare away birds. He wasn't smart, but he was loud. Then the air changed. Black sails appeared on the horizon, covered in flags with the Jolly Roger of the Beast Pirates. People stopped what they were doing, and it soon turned into yelling as they tried to gather their stuff and get to someplace safe. Then the cannons started firing, and the Beast Pirates landed on the village. The strongest members weren't interested enough to join, considering how weak the people of East Blue were thought to be. And the pirates weren't here to pillage. They were under orders to bring back the children. The pirates didn't explain. They just grabbed kids. Anyone that looked young enough was thrown into cages. Luffy fought back, of course. He bit, kicked, and even headbutted one of the pirates so hard that the man dropped his club. But it didn't matter. Luffy was too small, and the pirates were too many. They tossed him into a cage with a bruise on his forehead and a banana still in his hand. By nightfall, the ships had left. The village was left in flames, and most of the children were gone. Garp only found out a few days later when everything was already torn and ruined. Luffy and the others were taken to Wano. Some of the kids cried. Others sat still and didn't say anything. Luffy yelled the entire time, his tiny fists banging against the bars. When they arrived, the children were marched into a fortress deep in the mountains where they weren't treated kindly at all. Kaido's men didn't care if they were scared or hungry. The kids were there to be trained. Kaido finally appeared, and the massive man sent panic down the spines of even the hardiest of children. Even Luffy felt fear. Then he simply proclaimed that if the kids wanted to live, they'd have to train and survive. He was working toward making an army from scratch, and what better way to start than with a group of brats who didn't have anyone they could count on. Little did he know, someone was on his way. Luffy thought he was tough, but he was just a child. The first week, he threw up during a run, got chased by a giant boar, and was forced to punch trees until his knuckles bled. He cried. He got hit. He fell in the mud, but somehow he kept getting up. The other children changed too. Some grew quiet, some got stronger, others disappeared and were never seen again. And then chaos came knocking on Kaido's doorstep. Kaido heard the noises even in Onigashima, and he quickly turned into a dragon to go see what was happening. And there, he found the hero of the Marines, Monkey D. Garp. He was absolutely destroying the beast pirates that were trying to keep him at bay when he saw Kaido approach. Angered, the man leapt up in an instant. Kaido reacted with a bolo breath, but Garp cut through it and hit Kaido with a galaxy impact, sending Kaido crashing through the ground. Garp was falling toward the dragon when King showed up and cut him across the arm, deflecting him from his landing point on Kaido. Kaido got up from the ground in his hybrid form as Garp rose. He screamed at Kaido to give him his grandson back, but Kaido simply laughed and asked him if one of the runts he'd stolen was his. He then immediately leaped toward Garp with his kanabo, and Garp countered with his fist. The collision sent waves of haki crashing around them, throwing back beast pirates. The fight intensified, and Garp pushed Kaido back. Garp moved with unmatched force. He ducked a swing and buried his fist into Kaido's gut, sending the Emperor flying backward through one of the towers. Then King appeared and fought against Garp. The Marine hero sustained wounds, but King was no match for him and was on the losing end before Kaido got back up to fight. Garp dodged the kanabo, slammed Kaido into the earth, and followed with a brutal uppercut laced in armament haki that cracked Kaido's jaw. The sky split. Beast pirates watched, stunned. Garp was winning. Kaido struck back, smashing Garp through 3 stone pillars. But Garp rose again, his fury driving him. He was bloodied from the onslaught, but he was focused on getting back Luffy. He leapt forward and punched Kaido in the throat so hard that the Emperor choked and staggered forward. But King took the opportunity to slash Garp across the back, a deep cut through the skin. Kaido stood again, limping, blood staining his scales. He raised his kanabo and charged. The beast pirates piled on, taking advantage of the wound Garp sustained. Garp held on for quite some time afterward, but eventually it was too much. Kaido was ragged and bloody, but Garp's injuries were grave, and soon the Marine hero fell, his fists still clenched. Luffy looked on from a distance before he recognized his grandfather. He ran toward him, but Kaido saw him approach. He grabbed him in one hand and lifted him up. Seeing that this was the grandson Garp was after, Kaido grinned, thinking that he'd turn Luffy into the perfect weapon, and the training continued. Luffy wasn't given a moment to grieve. He was simply thrown into even rougher training, and soon, something inside him seemed to break. He endured and became tougher. He learned to dodge clubs, beat men older than him. He sustained numerous scars, but he kept going, because there was nothing else for him. In the early years, Yamato often came to the training grounds. He wasn't allowed to interfere, but he watched from behind the rocks or on top of buildings, hidden like a nosy ghost. The kids saw him from a distance and whispered about the strange mask and shackles. Some said he was a prisoner. Others said he was crazy. At first, there were a lot of children. They trained together, ate together, and tried not to cry at night. Every week or month, someone would be missing. Sometimes it was from training accidents. Other times it was failure. That word got thrown around a lot. Luffy didn't really understand the word, but he knew it was bad. Kids who failed didn't come back. Years passed. The group grew smaller until there was no one left at all except Luffy. By the time Luffy was 12, the training ground was empty. There were no more kids to fight. No more classes, just him. He sat alone during meals heels now. Sometimes he forgot what it was like to speak to someone his age. Kaido finally stepped in, glad that Luffy hadn't let his expectations down, and the training got worse, and Luffy got much stronger. He fought like a beast. No style, no rules, just fists and instinct. By the time Luffy was 15, he was no longer treated like a child. He was strong, stronger than most of Kaido's officers. He could bend steel bars, he could punch holes in walls. Still, he'd lost his smile, except around Yamato, with whom he'd formed a bond over the years. Both of them were Kaido's prisoners, but at least they weren't completely alone, and the two competed with each other often to see who was stronger. Yamato used to talk a lot about some Odin fellow, but Luffy barely listened. He didn't see much of a point. Then the day came when Kaido took most of the beast pirates and left on a raid. Yamato and Luffy remained. Sometime later, someone had come making a mess of the place. After doing some significant damage to Kaido's castle, Luffy and Yamato showed up. Excited at his new opponents, Luffy dived right in and faced Portgas D. Ace. He leapt from the top floor and landed like a hammer on the battlefield. Rocks cracked, dust exploded, soldiers stumbled back. Ace looked up, confused. He didn't know what hit him until it hit him again. Luffy shot forward like a cannonball, feet first, then fists. His punches were wild but sharp, each one aimed to hurt, not warn. Ace blocked one blow, caught the second, but the third smashed into his ribs. Fire blasted out of Ace's body, knocking Luffy back. Luffy grinned as he rushed back in. He spun on one hand and kicked out with both feet. Ace ducked and blasted a pillar of fire into Luffy's side. Luffy took it, rolled, and came back with a headbutt that knocked Ace off balance. The fight was making a mess of the castle, and they soon found their way near the dragon statue. Yamato kept up, watching with excitement. The fight got faster and hotter. Luffy's skin was scorched, but his fists never stopped. He fought like a wild animal. Every blow from Ace was returned with a wilder one. The fight finally stopped when Yamato smashed the dragon statue out of frustration at not being given a chance to fight. Ace and Luffy both looked at him, with Luffy's jaw dropping because of how angry Kaido would get at this. Ace realized that Yamato wasn't exactly on good terms with his father, and as the fighting stopped and they sat down, he found out that Luffy had once been from his own village. Ace downed sake like water as Yamato joined him, but Luffy didn't care for alcohol. He had meat. Somehow a bond had formed. Ace talked about the village and how he'd been able to avoid getting caught, but he felt saddened by what happened to the other children and what had happened to Luffy. Luffy said he didn't care much, but there was clearly something broken about him. Ace promised both Luffy and Yamato that he'd come visit again when he was stronger, and that maybe they could sail the seas together again someday. The next morning, Ace left after saying goodbye to the two. Luffy wondered about his old life, but he did feel a bit happy at having found someone like Ace. Yamato stood beside him and watched the ship vanish over the sea. Luffy went back to training and more time passed. He had gotten much stronger, and so had Yamato. Then the news came that Portgas D. Ace was set to be executed. Luffy clenched his fist when he heard the news, but he didn't tell Yamato about it. Kaido had already planned to participate in the war. Kaido didn't care about politics. He cared about power. When he heard that Whitebeard was going to war, he believed it would be the only chance he'd get to fight all out once more. He called for the ships, and soon they set sail. Kaido's fleet cut through the ocean like angry blades. Luffy stood at the front of the ship, wind tearing through his hair, eyes locked ahead. He was wearing dark armor now, dented from too much fighting. He decided that he might actually be able to save Ace if they reached the war. He'd try to, at least. Then in the distance, there were red sails, the Red Force belonging to another emperor of the sea, Shanks. Kaido, seeing this, ordered his crew to dock on a nearby island, and the Red Force followed. The ground shook as Kaido stepped off his ship, and the beast pirates followed. King, Queen, Jack, and the rest. Luffy walked just behind them. On the other side, Shanks stood calmly, sword at his side, a small smirk on his face. His crew formed a wall beside him. Ben Beckman lit a cigarette without blinking. Lucky Roo chewed meat like he was at a picnic. Yasop adjusted his rifle and spat in the dirt. Shanks asked Kaido what he was up to, sailing over to another war. Kaido didn't reply and instead charged. Shanks took out Gryphon and did the same. The first clash came like thunder. Kaido and Shanks collided, their weapons meeting in a storm of sparks and shockwaves. Kaido swung wide, but Shanks ducked under, slashing upward with precision that split a boulder in half. The crews exploded into battle as well, seeing their captains. King shot through the air and met Ben Beckman mid-leap. King's sword struck like lightning, but Ben blocked with his rifle, rolled forward, and slammed a knee into King's ribs. King grunted, but didn't back down. Their duel became a blur of speed. Queen stomped heavily into the fray, his massive frame looming like a juggernaut. His arms had transformed into imposing metal cannons, gleaming coldly under the battle's chaotic light. With a furious roar that echoed across the battlefield, he unleashed a barrage of explosive blasts at Lucky Roo. But the rotund man proved surprisingly agile, bouncing through the explosions like a rubber ball. His movements unpredictable and lively. Each time he closed the distance, Lucky Roo delivered swift, unexpected gut punches that forced Queen to curse through ragged wheezes, the air thick with the scent of smoke and sweat. Meanwhile, Luffy tore mercilessly through the battlefield, moving faster than any human eye could track. His limbs whipped like living rubber bands, his strength near inhuman, striking down any foe who dared cross his path. Yet the red-haired pirates pressed their advantage, their power clearly superior. Suddenly, a bullet streaked through the chaos, exploding on impact as it struck Luffy from the side. The massive force threw him off balance. One moment he was sprinting full speed, the next he was airborne, spinning wildly before crashing onto the deck of the Red Force. The world tilted violently as the wooden planks beneath him cracked and splintered with a brutal impact. Dazed and disoriented, Luffy struggled to his feet, finding himself in a shadowed storage area. He had landed on something solid that had cracked under his weight. Before him rolled a strange fruit, swirled with deep purples and blacks, its stem curling like a sharp hook. It looked oddly edible, and knowing how precious food was, Luffy grabbed it without hesitation. He took a big bite, but the taste was horrid, bitter, and foul. He grimaced, cleaned his tongue with a shake of his head, then stumbled back out to rejoin the raging battle. But something was different. His body felt strange and unfamiliar. Attempting to throw a punch, his arms suddenly stretched far beyond normal limits, inadvertently striking one of his own crewmates instead. Around him, Kaido and Shanks were locked in a fierce duel alongside their forces, but Luffy's mind swirled with confusion. He charged forward, his foot elongating oddly before smashing into the ground. The recoil sent him bouncing high into the air, flipping uncontrollably over his crewmates. He crashed headfirst into a tree, becoming tangled in thick branches before slingshotting uncontrollably across the field. His momentum carried him straight into Who's Who, knocking the seasoned fighter out cold by sheer accident. The chaotic spectacle even drew Shanks' attention. Mid-duel, the red-haired emperor turned his head slightly, narrowing his eyes as he caught sight of the boy with wildly flailing rubber limbs. A flicker of recognition crossed Shanks' face. This was the power of the devil fruit he'd once taken. Such a reckless fool! Kaido swung his kanabo again, but Shanks met the blow with a slower, more deliberate block. Then, breaking the rhythm of their clash, Shanks spoke with a calm authority. Kaido halted his attack. The two emperors stood frozen, a tense silence rippling through the battlefield as others gradually ceased fighting as well. Shanks told Kaido plainly that the war was nearing its end, and that any further fighting was pointless. By the time he could arrive, the outcome would already be decided. They argued briefly, the weight of their rivalry pressing down on them, before Kaido's grin faded and he clenched his kanabo tightly. Turning away, he gave the order for the beast pirates to retreat, signaling the close of one of the fiercest battles the seas had ever seen. Whatever Shanks said, Kaido understood. Shanks himself thought of approaching the boy, but he decided against it. This turn of events may just have been fate working. Then he turned and walked away, setting sail for Marineford. Luffy, meanwhile, realized that Ace's life would be left to fate. There was nothing he could do, and he simply swallowed the pain. The journey back was quiet. Kaido didn't say much, but he watched Luffy closely now. His eyes stayed sharp. He berated Luffy for eating a useless devil fruit and punched him hard for it. But despite this, they ended up back in Wano. He did believe that there was a chance that there was something about this devil fruit, one that was on the ship of an emperor, and decided to train Luffy himself. The world had shifted by this time. Luffy was unable to even try saving Ace. Whitebeard had died too, and the Marines tightened their grip. But Kaido continued preparing. For 2.5 years, Wano became a factory of war. Weapons piled high. Ships were rebuilt and reinforced. Recruits were drilled until they broke or became beasts using the smile fruits. The beast pirates swelled like a tidal wave, and at the center of it all stood Luffy. He was now absurdly stronger. Under Kaido's watch, Luffy had mastered all 3 types of haki. Observation helped him move before attacks were thrown. Armament made his fists feel like black stone, but it was Conqueror's haki advanced and violent that made him feared. When he and Yamato sparred, mountains shook. Their bond was forged in bruises. Then came Jack. Kaido had told Luffy to fight the All-Star or die trying, and so Luffy did just that. The beast pirates formed a wide circle around the stone field where the fight would happen. Jack stepped forward, holding his twin blades. Luffy cracked his neck. The ground trembled as they rushed forward. Jack came in fast, swinging low, trying to slice Luffy in half. Luffy's body twisted, stretching sideways like ribbon before snapping back with a spinning kick that bent the air. Jack tanked it and grabbed Luffy by the leg, but Luffy used the pull to launch his free foot straight into Jack's jaw. The blow echoed and Jack stumbled. Luffy didn't wait. He spun midair, black lightning sparking around his fists. His Conqueror's haki leaked like smoke. Each punch came coated in invisible force. The fight continued and the two were brutally assaulting each other. Jack roared and slammed his fist down, breaking the earth like a hammer. Dust flew. Luffy vanished, then appeared midair with his rubber legs coiled. His body steamed as he began punching abnormally fast. Each one bent Jack's armor inward. Jack countered with a spinning sweep, sending Luffy flying into a cliff. The wall shattered. Luffy peeled himself out, grinning before leaping again. Jack transformed into his mammoth form, but Luffy coated his fists in advanced Conqueror's haki and charged. And soon enough, Jack's body toppled. A massive punch bigger than the mammoth thrust Jack into the ground, and he didn't get back up. Kaido looked at the two and simply nodded. Luffy was now a part of the All-Stars. Then came Luffy's first real mission. He was to go to Zoo and end the Mink tribe there. Luffy simply nodded and set sail for the island on the back of a giant elephant. The Mink tribe had been harboring traitors and stirring rebellion, and it was time to put a stop to it. 3 ships departed Wano. On board were several Tobirapo, including Ulti, Sasaki, and Black Maria. They soon arrived on the island before nighttime and made their way up. They went through the area and ended up near a village where the Minks finally showed themselves. It was clear that they weren't planning on going down without a fight, since most of them were armed and their fangs were bared. Luffy led the charge and landed with a blast that cracked the stone streets of Zoo. Behind him, the Tobirapo and the other beast pirates launched forward. Ulti, Sasaki, Sasaki, Black Maria, and dozens of armored troops followed, weapons drawn. Minks rushed to defend their home, and it turned into an all-out battle. Claws scraped stone, spears flew, the sky filled with shouts and smoke. Luffy moved like lightning. His haki coated his fists in black as he bulldozed through lines of warriors, sending bodies flying. Walls broke beneath his fists, and entire streets caved in. But then, the main forces arrived, Inuarashi and Nekomamushi. These two were the strongest minks on the island, and Luffy had already been told to avoid fighting them under a full moon. But he wasn't one to listen and specifically attacked near the night because otherwise it would have been too easy. He and his forces had already decimated almost all of the minks who'd come to fight. Seeing the bloodshed enraged Inuarashi and Nekomamushi, and they attacked together, slicing from both sides. Luffy dodged and countered with brutal force. His fists stretched, slammed, and redirected midair. He blocked a slash with a haki-covered foot, spun, and elbowed Nekomamushi into a building. Inuarashi slashed Luffy across the chest, but Luffy tanked it and returned with a spinning uppercut that bent his weapon. They struck as a team, flanking, leaping, kicking off walls. Neko's claw tore through Luffy's side. Inu's sword cut his thigh. Blood poured, but Luffy kept laughing in silence, like the fight was sharpening him. Meanwhile, Ulti was dealing with some other minks. The other Tobirapa were more worried about the Sulong forms. Sasaki battled a pair of bear-like warriors. He rotated like a saw, slicing through shields, grinning the whole time. Black Maria wove webs across buildings, pulling mink archers into traps, disarming them with eerie calm. She strangled her prey with steel threads, smiling softly. Beast pirates pushed the minks into retreat, but Inuarashi and Nekomamushi continued fighting, and Luffy got serious. He began pummeling the two, throwing them against each other and punching them hard. He had been injured, but that was mostly because he was fooling around and testing his strength in a real battle. But then, the sun dipped, and the moon began to rise. The silver light bathed Zu, and Inuarashi and Nekomamushi's fur turned bright white. Their eyes glowed blue. Electricity surged through their limbs. Their bodies grew bigger and faster, like beasts made of moonlight and fury. On the battlefield, the few remaining minks howled and transformed too, and a new battle began. The tide turned instantly. Ulti was knocked into a wall by Pedro. Sasaki was attacked with lightning-fast slashes. Even Black Maria was finding it difficult to deal with Consulate. Dozens of beast pirates were flung into the air, and in the center of it all, Sulong Inuarashi and Sulong Nekomamushi descended upon Luffy like a storm. The power difference between them and their old forms was clear. They struck in flashes of claws and fangs. Luffy tried to fight back with his gears and haki, but he kept getting cut and overpowered. He was becoming frustrated when a punch sent him flying. His ribs cracked, and he crashed through a temple wall and rolled to a stop, face bloodied, breath ragged. He tried to stand, but Inuarashi was already on him and sent him into the ground with a massive punch. Luffy had underestimated the strength of the Sulong form, and things were looking dire. He was in a half-unconscious state when suddenly his rage peaked and his heart began beating louder in the crater. The air changed. Red clouds coiled above the battlefield. Luffy's heart thumped loud enough to shake stones, and his body began to shift. His hair curled up like fire and began flowing as he floated upwards, surrounded by blood-red clouds. He opened his eyes and they glowed like embers. The air around him warped, and even the Sulong warriors paused to look at this demonic beast. This was Gear 5. It was a beast's version, shaped by violence instead of freedom. Luffy grinned wide, but there was no warmth in it. His body stretched smoothly, but his movements were heavier, crueler. Nekomamushi leapt towards him, but Luffy caught him midair, spun once, and slammed him into the earth so hard the street cratered. Inuarashi slashed with his blade, but Luffy dodged, turned his fingers into spears, and stabbed through the air. They didn't touch, but the Conqueror's haki-coated shockwave sent Inuarashi flying into a wall near Nekomamushi. The two rose again, but Luffy was already above them. He made his arms spin like fans before dropping them down with a blow that shook the entire island. His sharp arms penetrated the two minks as their Sulong forms dissipated. By dawn, the moon had faded and the minks lay broken across their capital. Zu had fallen. Luffy stood on a cracked statue with blood staining his coat, steam rising from his body. His Gear 5 had ended and he was calm again, but he had changed. He was now a ruthless beast with the power to fell countries. Wano was storming when they returned. Thunder cracked across the sky as Kaido sat atop the skull dome of Onigashima, watching the ships dock below. His eyes weren't on the army, they were on Luffy. It felt like something had changed in the boy. He grinned when he heard the report that Zu had been overtaken and patted Luffy on the shoulder for destroying the beasts in Sulong form. Luffy simply pointed at King and said that he wanted to fight someone stronger. Kaido grinned menacingly and allowed the fight after Luffy was fed ample meat. The arena was cleared of all bystanders, the dust settling as the fearsome beast pirates gathered in a tense circle, eyes locked on the impending clash. King hovered slightly above the ground, a storm of conflicting emotions brewing beneath his cold, stoic mask. A hint of annoyance flickered in his eyes. After all, here was a boy barely half his age daring to challenge him. But duty was duty, and King was a soldier who obeyed orders without hesitation. Without a word, he unsheathed his sleek, deadly blade. His massive wings stretched wide, catching the breeze and stirring the air with a low roar of flame that flared along his back like a living furnace. From his elevated vantage point, he cast a sharp, penetrating gaze down at Luffy, who stood firm and unflinching crunching beneath him. Luffy's smile was wide, almost playful, as his body shimmered and shifted, morphing into the unstoppable force of Gear 5. There was a wild energy in his eyes that spoke of unleashed power and unbreakable will. King reacted instantly, dashing through the air with the speed and precision of a guided missile, his wings folding back tightly to reduce drag. He came in low, aiming a brutal strike, then feinted high, his blade swinging down with terrifying force, aimed to cleave Luffy in two. But Luffy was no ordinary opponent. He twisted with uncanny flexibility, his torso stretched sideways, the blade passing harmlessly through empty air as he slipped past the strike. Coiling mid-spin, Luffy snapped back with a kick wrapped in his signature rubber elasticity that struck like a whip crack, the impact so fierce it fractured the stone beneath King's feet. Not to be outdone, King launched himself into the sky again, diving with renewed ferocity. Luffy bent backward in a breathtaking display of flexibility, catching King's blade with the sole of his foot. With a fluid spin, Luffy flung King violently into the cliffside. The force of the collision sent rocks and debris exploding outward in a thunderous spray. Moments later, King emerged from the rubble, his mask cracked and battle-worn, but his eyes betrayed the first trace of doubt. How could this boy be so strong? Even Kaido, looming nearby, had been taken aback by Luffy's unrelenting handling of King's assault. Enraged, King darted once more through the air, zigzagging with deadly unpredictability, striking from 10 different angles as if he were a storm made flesh. Luffy met each attack head-on, his arms coated thickly in haki, stretching and warping to form shields and walls that absorbed King's savage blows. He launched a furious counterattack, fists whipping out like snapping whips, each blow generating shockwaves that shattered towers and sent shockwaves rippling through the arena. Minutes stretched into a brutal, unyielding dance of power and skill. Then, with a sudden surge, Luffy propelled himself into the air, his body expanding in size as he twisted into a coiled spring of tension and raw force. With a tremendous roar, he slammed down a punch as massive as a boulder, smashing King into the ground with such devastating impact that dust and rubble swallowed the entire arena. King coughed up blood but forced himself back to his feet, eyes burning with fury and disbelief. Luffy stood before him, calm and unshaken, while King struggled to create distance. But before he could move, Luffy dashed forward with lightning speed, seizing King midair by the wing. In a brutal, shocking motion, Luffy ripped the wing clean off. Blood sprayed like a violent fountain, and the crowd recoiled in horror at the savage display. From the shadows, Kaido stepped forward onto the battlefield, his massive presence blotting out the sun as he positioned himself squarely before Luffy. The boy casually dropped the torn wing to the ground as King's agonized screams echoed behind him. Kaido's expression darkened, fury boiling beneath his monstrous exterior. But Luffy only laughed, taunting King with cruel words, calling him weak and pitiful. Enraged, Kaido swung his massive kanabo with brutal force toward Luffy, but the boy blocked effortlessly, his gaze locking onto Kaido's with a burning, bloodthirsty intensity. The air around them seemed to ignite with tension, crackling with the sheer power radiating from the two adversaries. Kaido's massive kanabo gleamed menacingly in his grasp, veins pulsating with raw, untamed energy. And so, the battle began in earnest. The two titans clashed with earth-shattering force. Luffy twisted and ducked, his rubbery limbs whipping and snapping with deadly precision. Then, in a dazzling burst, he struck back with a blow wrapped in advanced conqueror's haki, the shockwaves rippling through the very foundation of the island. Kaido roared in fury, unleashing a furious barrage of strikes, each one so powerful it threatened to shatter the earth beneath him. The battle rocked Onigashima to its core. Luffy's Gear 5 was no longer a playful power. It was the embodiment of a beast's pure rage. His body warped into grotesque, monstrous shapes, arms thickened into stone-like clubs, legs coiled like deadly springs, charged with lethal speed. Each punch landed with crushing force that echoed like thunder. All around them, destruction spread like wildfire. Buildings crumbled, and the island itself groaned beneath the relentless assault. Every blow felt as if it could be the one to bring the entire land crashing down. The battle took to the skies as Kaido transformed into his massive dragon form, soaring and roaring overhead. Luffy, undeterred, seized Kaido's tail and whipped the colossal beast toward the ground with a devastating force. In hybrid form, Kaido landed several massive attacks that cracked Luffy's bones and tore through flesh. But the boy only laughed, maniacal and defiant, pressing on relentlessly. Hours dragged on as the two tore across the landscape, their fight a storm of chaos and destruction that seemed endless. Luffy's attacks became a furious blur, a relentless storm of destruction. Kaido swung his kanabo with earth-shaking power, but Luffy caught the weapon with one hand, twisting with ferocity until the massive club snapped clean in two. Blood dripped freely from both fighters, Kaido's scales cracked and bleeding. Luffy's breaths came heavy, body bruised and battered, but his eyes burned with fierce determination. Kaido delivered a brutal strike that sent Luffy crashing through stone walls, but the boy rose again, soaked in blood, a cold and savage grin spreading across his face. Fueled by unyielding will, Luffy surged forward, fists blazing with advanced conqueror's haki. His blows rained down on Kaido, shattering armor and scales with brutal efficiency. Gathering all his strength, Luffy coiled his arm like a mighty spring, his fist swelling to a monstrous size, eclipsing even the vastness of Onigashima itself. With a deafening roar, the punch crashed down onto to Kaido's head, sending the Emperor hurtling into a massive crater. Silence fell over the battlefield as Kaido lay motionless, defeated. The Beast Pirates stared in stunned disbelief at Luffy, who stood victorious, looking down into the crater where Kaido had fallen. Without hesitation, Luffy turned and made his way toward Kaido's throne, his every step claiming the power and legacy of the island. It was his now. Make sure to subscribe and smash the like button for more One Piece videos!